Joe, in the second year, you go 13-13. Then in the next year, you get to the Final Four. And how were you able to turn that team around from 13-13 to a Final Four team?
I really had a good bunch of young men.
Mm-hmm.
I had my sophomore year. I had Jimmy Dan Connor.
Oh,
I had Kevin Greavy, Mike Flynn, Bob Guyette, and I just had a good group. They were young, and we had Jim Andrews and Larry Stamper, Ronnie Lyons, and we had a mixture of some older players. Well, that next year we lost our big man, Jim Andrews, and I had to move Guyette to the post. And we were a very small team. I had Ronnie Lyons and Mike Flynn at the guards. Ronnie was about 5'9", Flynn was about 6'2", Connor and Greavy 6'3", 6'4" at forwards, and Guyette at about 6'7" at center. And so we lost that height. And then about 6 games of the season, we lost Kevin Greavy, and he was injured. We lost Rick Roby after about that was another year down the road. But losing Greavy probably cost us about 6 games that year. And but then the next year I brought in Roby and Phillips.
Ooh.
And suddenly Jack Givens and James Lee. And we went from a small ball club to a very, very big ball club. We had Roby and Phillips, which were 6'10" guys that I played at the same time. I got to move Guyette back to forward. I moved Connor from forward up to guard with Flynn, and Greavy was my small forward. So suddenly we were a very big, strong, experienced ball club. That made a huge difference.
You know, you mentioned a guy, Guyette. We talked before we sat down to do the interview about I never wanted to recruit against Kentucky, but I actually went up to Marquette it was Marquette, Illinois, right?
No, it was Ottawa.
Ottawa.
Yeah.
But was the school named Marquette?
No, it could have been. Yeah.
I think the school was called Marquette because I actually, it was Marquette High School, and I recruited him, and the minute I found out you guys were interested in him, I said, hell, I ain't going to waste any more Washington State's money in that. But, Joe, you had that special time there, 75, 76, 78, when you really now you've got your own program, and there's no doubt in anybody's mind that you can deliver. In 75, you go to the Final Four, and in 76, you win the NIT, and in 78, you come back and win the national championship. What are some of the fond memories you have of that period right there, Joe?
Well, I just had a great group of young men. I had some assistant coaches that were just outstanding. Boyd Grant, Dickie Parsons, Jim Hatfield. Just a real great group. We worked well together. And with that nucleus of Connor, Flynn, Greavy, Guyette, gave me a great start. And that led to more good recruiting. And we just kept good kids coming in. And as you know, George, the secret is a big part of it is recruiting.
Getting good players and good people.
If you couldn't recruit at Kentucky, you couldn't recruit any place. And the only thing I had was to bridge that gap from coach up to no name. And, the toughest battle, George, and I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but when you move up from being an assistant for 7 years in a program, no one up and down the hall really accepts you as a head coach. And that's one of your biggest hurdles, is that you've always been thought of as a lowly assistant. Now all of a sudden you're a head coach. You've got to get a respect of your co-workers in your athletic department, and that takes time.
And that's a good learning point for young coaches today. Not only do you have to secure credibility externally, but you've got to achieve it internally too.
A big job.
Right.
Yeah.
Joe, one of your signature things as a coach was you always coach with the rolled up program. How did that come about with the rolled up program?
You know, Coach Rupp was such a superstitious person. Mm-hmm. Did you ever hear of all of his superstitions?
I've heard a lot of rough stories in my day.
Well, he had so many superstitions. The managers had to keep record of how things had to proceed on game day. And for instance, when he came in the locker room before they were to go on the floor, the managers handed him 3 sticks of chewing gum. He always took spearmint, the middle one, and he unfolded the papers, threw the papers down beside the trash can, never in it, put the gum in his mouth, went to the 3rd locker, opened the door, and got a Kleenex to clean his glasses. Then he took the game program and he marked the starters and handed it to the assistant to report them to the score. Well, I took that program. Mm-hmm. And as I held it in my hand, I always rolled it and carried it. And that's the way I started carrying the program. As we went into the floor, there was a guy standing there that he had to shake hands with before he went on the floor. The managers laid down a damp towel for the players to wipe the dust off of their feet after the shooting warm-up. The towel had to lay there until the ball was tipped. Then the manager picked it up and threw it over Coach Rupp picked it up, threw it over by a leg of the scorer's table, that it had to stay there until the Wildcats scored their first basket.
Oh, my God.
On game day, Coach Rupp would be out walking the streets of parking lots looking for hairpins. If he could find a hairpin, it meant victory. If the open end of the hairpin was pointed towards him, it meant we were going to win by big score.
Oh, my God.
When Coach Rupp got the ulcerated foot next to his last year, and they inhibited him from taking those walks, well, it became the job of the managers to sew hairpins on the way to the bus to go to the arena. And they would get in a hurry, and they'd go to Woolworths, and they'd buy a box of brand new hairpins. And they'd go to his motel door and just dump the whole box. It would be like an anthill of hairpins right outside his door. He would open that door, look down, he'd say, "By George, Joe, look what I found." And he'd scoop up those hairpins. And he had so many other superstitions. After the pregame meal at noon, he had a manhole cover he had to step on with his right foot coming back from the student union before he crossed the street going to his office. And he drove by the same route from his house to the Coliseum or from the Coliseum to his house. He put his left sock on before his right sock. And you know he always wore the brown suit.
He was known as the man in the brown suit.
He had so many superstitions that when I first was met with the press and announced my taking the position of head coach, I came back to the parking lot behind the Coliseum with Dick Parsons, who became my first assistant. And we were standing there, and I looked down, and there was a hairpin, was the biggest hairpin I've ever seen in my life. And I picked it up, and I said, "Dickie, are we going to start this?" He said, "I hope not." So I pitched it up on the hood of my car. And I drove home, bounced up in the driveway, got out and walked around, and that hairpin was still there. I picked it up, put it in my pocket, And on game day, you'd find me out looking for her.
So you caught the fever.
I caught the fever.
Joe, when you look back now at during your tenure at UK, what were probably two of your most memorable games?
Probably the first round of the NCAA in '75. I believe it was.
Indiana?
No, Marquette.
Marquette, okay.
And we were 4 down at halftime, and Al McGuire, I think they were ranked number 4 in the nation. And we came back the second half and put the 1-3-1 zone.
Oh, yeah.
And
won famous for.
Won by 22.
Ooh.
And that was just a beautiful half of basketball. The finals of the region in '75 against Indiana, they were undefeated, ranked number 1 in the nation, had really whipped us.
Beat you 24 in the regular season, right?
Whipped us everywhere but on the bottom of our feet. And we came back in a great attitude, a great team that came together, a ball club that was determined, and they beat Indiana up at Dayton in that game. And
that was in the regional, NC2A regional.
In the final region in '75. And then the next year, we played them at home, and we were 1 point ahead with the ball in 35 seconds. And they were undefeated that year. And they got the ball, went down, took a shot and missed. Benson tipped the ball 15 feet above the basket, came down through the basket, and they tied us. We'd been 2 ahead, and they beat us in overtime. And that year they went undefeated and won the NCAA. So those 3 games were very memorable.
So for someone who didn't have a chance to see you coach during your historic career, what kind of coach was Joe Hall?
Oh, man, somebody else would have to answer that. We won a lot of games, I know that. And we made 3 trips to the Final Four. We won the NIT. We were ranked just about every year. And that was attributed to great players, good assistants, and a great tradition of the Kentucky program.
And a hell of a head coach.